One morning, the airfield came alive with movement. Men in uniform hauled out heavy boxes from the back of a truck, setting them on the tarmac in neat rows. The boxes looked ordinary until someone opened one. Inside lay hundreds of tiny bodies, dead mice, packed in layers like cargo for a strange, grim mission. Moments later, a helicopter's rotors began to turn. The soldiers loaded the boxes on board, closed the doors, and the machine lifted into the humid Pacific air. What followed looked less like science and more like a war. Flying low, just above the treetops, the helicopter made a slow circle. Then, one by one, the people inside began tossing out the mice. Each had a tiny parachute. They opened midair, a grotesque rain of small gray bodies floating gently through the canopy. 2,000 dead mice, drifting down toward the branches, each one laced with poison. What happened that morning wasn't part of a movie. It happened on Guam, a small island in the western Pacific, and it was one of the strangest scientific experiments ever carried out by the U.S. government. And now, more than a decade later, some scientists are considering whether that same idea, dropping poison mice from the sky, could be repeated in Florida. If they try, the results could go two ways. Could save the state from an ecological nightmare, or it could start one. In 2013, after years of planning, the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Department of Defense launched what they called a biocontrol operation. To everyone else, it looked like madness. Dead mice with parachutes falling from the sky. But Guam had a problem, one that no other place on Earth had. The brown tree snake, native to Australia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands, it hitched a ride to Guam after World War II, likely hidden inside military cargo. First, no one noticed. Then the island's nights began to change. The birds went silent. The brown tree snake isn't deadly to humans. Its venom barely stings. But for Guam's fragile ecosystem, it was catastrophic. In just a few decades, these snakes wiped out nearly every native bird. 10 of 12 species vanished completely. The forest, once alive with song, fell quiet. And in that silence, something else took over: spiders. With no birds left to eat them, spider populations exploded, growing 40 times higher than anywhere nearby. The snakes didn't stop there. They grew long, some over 10 feet, and they learned to climb power poles, causing massive blackouts across the island. Scientists estimate there are about 3 million of them now, with up to 5,000 snakes per 4 square miles in some areas. The brown tree snake wasn't just killing wildlife. It was strangling an entire island. When scientists studied the snake, they found one weakness: its stomach. Brown tree snakes will eat almost anything: birds, lizards, eggs, even other snakes. And they'll eat something even if it's already dead. That made them the perfect target. Because there's one substance that kills them instantly, a painkiller that millions of humans take every day: paracetamol or Tylenol. Safe for people, lethal for snakes. A dose smaller than a pea, just 1/16 of a pill, is enough to kill a brown tree snake. So the plan was simple: lace thousands of dead mice with paracetamol. Drop them into the jungle. Let the snakes eat their way to extinction. The idea cost the U.S. over $8 million and took years to design. But the scientists were confident. Guam had no other predators that could eat the mice in large numbers. The risk seemed low. And for Guam, it worked, at least partly. The operation didn't wipe out the snakes, but it slowed them down. It gave the island a fighting chance. Thousands of miles away, Florida is facing its own invasion, one that's eerily similar. But this time, the enemy isn't the brown tree snake. It's the Burmese python. Over the past few decades, more than 500 non-native species have taken root in Florida. But none have changed the landscape like the pythons. These snakes aren't supposed to be here. They were brought over as exotic pets, and when they grew too big, some owners simply let them go. In Florida's hot, swampy wilderness, they found paradise. No natural predators. Endless prey. Now they rule the Everglades. By some estimates, there are over 100,000 Burmese pythons slithering through the wetlands, some over 18 feet long. They eat everything: rabbits, raccoons, deer, even alligators. And what they don't eat, they infect. Because the pythons brought something else with them, a parasite, a microscopic invader called Raleatiella orientalis. It barely affects the pythons, but when it reaches Florida's native snakes, like pygmy rattlers, it's deadly. The parasite eats away at their lungs, suffocating them from the inside. This one invader, carrying another invader, has destabilized an entire ecosystem. So when scientists looked at Guam and saw that parachutes filled with poison mice had worked there, even a little, they started wondering, could the same method save Florida? On paper, it makes sense. Pythons eat mice. Paracetamol kills snakes. Case closed. But the reality is far messier. The snakes in Guam ate dead prey naturally. Pythons in the Everglades don't. In the wild, a snake's attack depends on three things: movement, heat, and smell. It hunts by detecting infrared radiation, in other words, by seeing heat. A living, warm-bodied animal triggers that instinct. A cold, dead mouse? Doesn't. Even if thousands of poison mice rain down from the sky, many pythons might simply ignore them. And even if they didn't, Florida isn't Guam. Guam is small and isolated. A volcanic rock surrounded by ocean. It had no snakes before the brown tree snake arrived, and few predators to compete for the mice. Florida, on the other hand, is alive. It's one of the most biodiverse regions in North America, home to hundreds of predators and scavengers. Foxes, panthers, bears, coyotes, hawks. All would see the falling mice as an easy meal. The problem is, those mice would be toxic. For snakes, a single mouse is fatal. For mammals, it might take dozens. But what happens when a raccoon or a fox or an owl eats several poison mice? What happens when that poison moves through the food chain, from one animal to another? The answer is chaos. On Guam, the plan worked because the ecosystem was simple. In Florida, it's anything but. Florida has 45 native snake species. Most of them are harmless and vital. They control rodent populations, eat pests, and even prey on venomous snakes, keeping everything in balance. But if poison mice were dropped from the sky, those native snakes would eat them too. And that balance would collapse. Because once the native snakes are gone, rodents multiply, crops suffer, diseases spread. And ironically, the pythons, the very problem the operation was meant to solve, would lose their only competitors and rise even faster. It's a feedback loop of disaster. Even Guam's operation wasn't as clean as it sounded. According to animal welfare experts, death from paracetamol isn't instant. It causes internal bleeding and organ failure that can take hours, sometimes days. It's a slow death, invisible but far from painless. And if that's what it took to control one species on a small island, imagine what it would look like over the vast swamps of Florida. Tens of thousands of mice, millions of dollars, and no guarantee it would even work. To understand why Guam's story can't be repeated, you have to understand what happened there. Before the snakes came, the island was alive with sound. Birds filled the forests. Their songs marked dawn and dusk. Then came the cargo ships and the stowaway serpents. At first, people noticed only a few. Then their dogs went missing. Then the trees grew quiet. Within years, Guam's bird populations were nearly gone. The brown tree snake climbed at night, wrapping itself around branches, raiding nests, devouring eggs. The birds had never evolved with snakes. They didn't know fear. They sat still, even as death slithered closer. By the time scientists realized what was happening, it was too late. The island's forests fell eerily silent, an ecological apocalypse in slow motion. The parachuted mice weren't an act of cruelty. They were an act of desperation. And yet, the idea of fighting nature with chemistry never quite goes away. In 2013, experts already warned, there's no place on Earth with a snake problem like Guam. But that was before Florida's crisis grew this big. The temptation to copy Guam's experiment is real. But every expert agrees. The differences are too great, the risks too high. Guam's isolation made it a laboratory. Florida is a living, breathing web of ecosystems, connected to everything from the Gulf to the Atlantic. A single misstep could ripple outward, killing more than just snakes. The cost wouldn't just be measured in money, but in silence. So scientists began to think differently. If poison from the sky wouldn't work, maybe intelligence on the ground would. Their newest weapon? Rabbits. But not real ones. Robotic rabbits. Created by the South Florida Water Management District, these decoy creatures are built to lure pythons out of hiding. Each costs around $4,000 and runs on solar power. They move, emit heat, and even mimic the erratic hopping of real prey. Hidden cameras watch them constantly. When a python approaches, the system sends an alert, and contractors rush in to capture the snake. It's part science fiction, part necessity. And for the first time, it seems to work. The robots don't need food, shelter, or care. They're waterproof, programmable, and designed to survive in the swamp. And if a python gets too suspicious, scientists plan to coat the machines with the scent of real rabbits. The Everglades may have found its mechanical hunters. But not all solutions come from machines. Some come with fur, teeth, and a leash. Finding a python in the wild is almost impossible. They camouflage perfectly, blend into the mud and reeds. Even drones with heat cameras can't find them. Cold-blooded bodies don't show up against the warm swamp. So, scientists turn to a weapon that never fails: the nose of a dog. Florida's Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission began training Labradors, Truman and Eleanor, to track the scent of pythons. They started small. Trainers gave the dogs towels soaked in python scent, and eventually live snakes with trackers. After weeks of conditioning, the dogs were released into the wild. And it worked. In 2020, Truman detected his first python, an 8-foot monster, buried deep in the brush. Since then, both dogs patrol the Everglades 5 days a week, sniffing out invaders invisible to human eyes. When they detect a snake, they stop and signal their handlers, allowing biologists to close in safely. The dogs have learned to ignore distractions, birds, raccoons, even alligators, and focus solely on the scent of their prey. In tests, they outperform human teams by a wide margin. In the war against pythons, man's best friend may be the most effective soldier. But sometimes, to stop a predator, you need another predator. That's the philosophy behind one of Florida's boldest programs, the reintroduction of the eastern indigo snake. Once common throughout the southeastern U.S., indigo snakes nearly vanished by the 1970s as their habitats were destroyed. They were placed on the endangered species list in 1978. Now, biologists are bringing them back. Each year, dozens of captive-bred indigos are released into the wild, including 42, released this spring in North Florida. Why indigos? Because they're big, non-venomous, and fearless. They eat birds, rodents, and even other snakes, including venomous ones. And yes, that includes baby pythons. In one documented case, researchers filmed an indigo snake killing and swallowing a newborn Burmese python whole. They can't take on the adults, not yet, but by preying on the young, they cut the problem at its source. Every python hatchling that dies means one less predator growing up to terrorize the Everglades. It's nature fighting back with its own weapons. None of these methods alone will save Florida. But together, they form something new, a strategy built on precision, not poison. Robot decoys, detection dogs, native predators, genetic tracking, public programs that reward python hunters. Every tool plays its part. In Florida, people are even allowed to humanely kill pythons year-round on private land, and each summer, the state hosts the Florida Python Challenge, a public event that rewards participants with cash for capturing the biggest or most snakes. It's part science, part spectacle, and part survival. Because behind the headlines and viral videos lies a brutal truth. This isn't just about snakes. It's about control. The Everglades, one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth, is fighting to keep its identity. Dropping things from the air might sound insane, but in Florida it's nothing new. In 1997, helicopters and trucks spread more than 130,000 oral rabies vaccines across Pinellas County. Small baits coated with a sugary scent to attract wild animals like raccoons and foxes. It worked. The disease vanished from the area within a few years. Today, the same strategy continues. The U.S. Department of Agriculture drops rubeola vaccine baits annually across multiple states to stop rabies before it spreads further south. Each bait smells irresistible to animals. A mix of fats, wax, sugar, and marshmallow. For humans, it's harmless. For wildlife, it's protection. Planes and helicopters scatter the doses like confetti from the sky. In Texas alone, more than 800,000 doses are spread each season. The skies of Florida have rained medicine before. But poison is another story. The poison mice of Guam will always be remembered as both a success and a warning. They slowed the brown tree snake's conquest, but they didn't end it. The snakes still slither through Guam's forests today, and the island's birds, its true victims, have not returned. The parachutes worked. But at what cost? The idea that humans can fix one mistake with another, that we can drop death from the sky and call it science, is tempting. But ecosystems don't work like equations. They don't erase cleanly. They remember. Florida now stands at the same crossroads Guam once faced. The threat is different, but the question is the same. How far are we willing to go to undo what we've done? Poisoned skies? Or precision and patience? Robots and dogs and reborn predators might sound strange, but maybe that's what it takes to fight a modern invasion without repeating the old mistakes. Because once the silence falls, once the birds are gone and the balance breaks, no amount of parachutes can bring the sound of life back again.